All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We still have our delegates trickling in from having their dessert and coffee. But again, we will be carrying on with the next panel discussion. And this, of course, is on building a low-carbon future. Now, moderating this session, ladies and gentlemen, is Mr. John Moore, Chief Executive Officer at Bloomberg New Energy Finance. And we see our panelists making their way up on stage already, but allow me to introduce who they are one at a time. We have, firstly, Dato Ahmad FAUZI bin Hassan, CEO, Energy Commission of Malaysia. Masakazu Toyoda, Chairman and CEO, Institute of Energy Economics, Japan. Agneta Rising, Director General, World Nuclear Association. Sakari Oksanen, Deputy Director General, International Renewable Energy Agency. Steve O'Neill, CEO at REC, and finally, Peter SCHWARTZ, Senior Vice President, Global Government Relations and Strategic Planning, Salesforce.com. We're going to hand over the session to Mr. Moore. And ladies and gentlemen, again, not to forget to post the questions at Pigeonhole Live. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you're back, had your coffee, had your desserts. Thank you to EMA for putting on this session today. What we're going to talk about is building the low-carbon future. We're going to focus more on implementation. What you've heard earlier today is a lot of the trends are now well understood, but the devil is in the detail of implementation. So we're going to touch on some of those things today. And what I'm going to do is sort of kick off and ask my panel, first of all, to explain their organization, where they're coming from, and also how their organization views the energy transition. Because I think that will then give us some context to talk about the different technologies and geographies. So I'm going to run down the panel and they'll share some views on that. Should we start with Mr. Oksanen?
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. Indeed, I represent International Renewable Energy Agency. It is an independent intergovernmental agency, not part of the UN system, but still works as an intergovernmental organization, just 5 years old. But within this relatively short period, I think we have found our place in the arena of international organizations in the sense that our membership is almost universal. We have 175 members, or countries which are in the process of applying to be a member. And European Union is then also one non-country member, or the only one. We have a very straightforward and very clear objective and mission. It is to promote increased adoption and sustainable use of renewable energy worldwide. So simple as that. We are promoting renewable energy. And in doing this, of course, we are active among other activities to support countries in building their transition to sustainable and more renewables-based future. And to the question about whether the transition is ongoing, I think what we have heard the whole morning in almost every presentation is that it is a fact. The transition, especially in the electricity sector, is a reality. As we speak, happening, the momentum is there right now. And as mentioned also, it is largely driven by the cost reductions of renewable energy. Rachel Kite already mentioned IRENA figures that in 5 years, the cost of solar modules reduced by 80% and the cost of wind turbines by about 1/3. Also, the examples that show the current competitiveness of renewable energy have been mentioned here before. I mean that there are recent contracts in competitive bidding through auctions in many countries like in Dubai, Chile and Mexico, where solar energy, solar power from PV plants is sold at 3 to 4 cents per kilowatt hour. As to onshore wind, we talk about 4 to 5 cents in Brazil and Chile, for instance. And in offshore wind, that was also was mentioned already this morning, the magical limit of 10 cents was broken just recently. We are at around 8 cents at the moment. And a big game changer, the 8 megawatts range of wind turbine has come to the market and will certainly increase productivity and efficiency of the wind production in the year. And it's not only solar and wind. I just recently was in discussion with one developer on ocean energy. And looking at the ocean energy, it is very much, I feel, comparable to what has happened in the wind energy something like 10, 15 years ago. I'm sure that its cost is bound to reduce and the learning curve will be much cheaper downwards than it has been for wind energy. So I expect in 5, 10 years from now there be ocean energy coming with vigor. So the transition is underway. But what is also mentioned here, I would like to highlight that this is really an electricity sector transition. There are other sectors where the transition is not as evident. However, to highlight the importance of the other sectors would be extremely important. IRENA carries a roadmap analysis which is based on the Sustainable Energy for All and Sustainable Development Goals targets. The target year is 2030, and we base our analysis on the assumption that the world needs to double the share of renewable energy by 2030 from what it was 2010. Then it was 18%. So the target for 2030 is 36%. And interestingly, if we look at the business as usual and the government plans and NDCs and everything, where are we in 2030? The share of renewables is 21%, even with this transition that is going on the electricity sector. We reach only 21%. So there is really a pressing need to start focusing the other sectors, which include buildings, renewable energy use in industry, transportation that has been mentioned, and then the energy efficiency. So we need to start thinking and focusing and seeking ways to get the transition to these sectors to really make a difference. And this difference is required from the climate perspective. So we need to shift from the direct use of fuels in industries, in transport, and make the processes primarily electric, like in electric vehicles replacing fuel, and in industrial processes using solar panels to preheat process waters, etc., before we enter the fuels in. I would like to mention a second one. Everything what I have said so far has been said this morning. As a final point, I want to highlight one aspect which has not been mentioned here, and it is the huge role of bioenergy. Bioenergy is controversial and people don't want to speak about it because they think they go to muddy waters with respect of sustainability. But I think the world needs to solve the issue and establish what is sustainable, what is not sustainable, how can we exploit bioenergy in a sustainable manner. It is a very big share of the solution to get to 36%.
Thank you. Toyoda-san.
Yes, my name is Kazu Toyoda. I'm CEO and chairman of Institute of Energy Economics in Japan. It's a think tank on energy and environment. As a think tank on energy and environment, we think energy and climate change problem two sides of one coin. In order to move toward the low carbon future, we think energy transition is inevitable. But the key word here is how we could let economic growth and measures taken to address climate change compatible with each other. I think Paris Agreement is a success, but only a success toward a greater success. As Party Bureau's executive director said, it was not sufficient enough when we see the sum of INDC in totality. It is still continuing to increase. How we could reduce emissions, that's important. So by 2020, we have to have a review. We need to encourage our friends in mostly developing countries to make further efforts. In order to that, the keyword is technology and international cooperation to promote technological transfer from developed countries and developing countries. They also, among developed countries, international cooperation to develop new technology, innovative technology, CCU, CCS, carbon capture use and carbon capture and storage, and also probably low carbon or carbon-free hydrogen produced from fossil fuel is also important. I stop here. I just wanted to say what we are trying to work for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Riesing, the nuclear view.
The nuclear view. Exactly, we need to mention nuclear because nuclear is very, very much in fashion. I will also say that nuclear is a key pillar if we're going to solve the puzzle of a low-carbon future. I'm Agneta Riesing. I'm from the Director General of the World Nuclear Association, and our mission is to achieve a wider understanding on nuclear energy among key international stakeholders. We do this by getting facts, researching, providing information, authoritative information. We have a website where we have information library. And this website is used by ministers, ambassadors, professors, students doing research on special topics. So you can go there to find information. We are today talking about new energy realities, and I love energy, and I love realities. So I'm trying to stick to some of the facts. And one of the biggest drivers I see in the transition is that we need low carbon energy. And we need that large scale. Of course, we can do energy efficiency. We should do energy conservation whenever we can do it. But we cannot do energy conservation to get us out of the problem that we need large scale, low carbon energy. So for me, the energy transition has three big drivers. One is the growing electricity demand. And this, one part of this is that we have 1.1 billion people without access to electricity. We have a transport sector that is getting more and more electrified. And we have urbanization. So these areas need electricity, and demand is growing up, and it's not slowing. The other driver is clean air. And we have talked already about it, and that is air pollution. We have 6.5 million deaths, premature deaths yearly. And this is because of air pollution. And mostly of this is because using either fossil fuels or other bad fuels in small homes for cooking. Then we have the climate agreement, where we are going to keep the temperature increase below 2 degrees. So I see this energy transition is about clean energy and a large-scale need for clean, low-carbon energy. So we should not make a mistake to put renewables in one pot and the fossil fuels in the other, because when it comes to low carbon, we have, first of all, we have nuclear, and we have also a lot of technologies that was mentioned of carbon capture and storage. And we need all these technologies, and we need innovations and technology development. So all these low carbon technologies working together, that is what we call harmony. And we need them all. We cannot discard any one of them. And we have to build everything on serious, because of these serious problems, on facts. So I would give you a few facts now in my startup. And first of all, nuclear is the world's second largest low-carbon energy source right now, providing 11% of electricity. Europe's largest low-carbon energy source is nuclear, providing 27% of the electricity. In US, the largest low-carbon energy source is nuclear, providing 20%. So we know also these are strong economies. And IEA make a 2-degree scenario. In that scenario, nuclear is supposed to deliver one of the largest proportions in the year 2050. So it's important to have it in the puzzle. It's important to talk about it and to look at the facts. And for 25 years, there's been a low growth rate in nuclear, but now we have the highest construction rate in the 25 years. Last year, we brought online 10 gigawatt of new nuclear, and over the 25 years before, it has been below 5. So nuclear energy doubled its capacity brought online. And we need to reach the targets for 2050, we need to double again, and then double again. So this is really high-quality investments needed, and it gives also sustainable energy and a lot of very skilled jobs. So I think these facts are important if we're going to manage the transition to a low-carbon energy future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll return to nuclear hopefully later if we have the time. So, Mr. Hassan from Malaysia, the view from Southeast Asia.
Yeah, thank you. Basically, I work with the Energy Commission of Malaysia. We are the energy regulator, and in the context of today's forum, we regulate the power sector and also the pipe gas sector. And what we are aiming at is basically we are looking at ensuring the security, reliability in the supply of power as well as pipe gas, as well as not to mention equally important the affordability aspect in the sector. As well as the quality of services and also safety. In the context of the power sector planning, we are looking at master plan for the Peninsular Malaysia and the other states, specifically Sabah in East Malaysia, together with Peninsula. We have been, over the years, going with oil in the 80s, and then we embarked on gas, natural gas, in a big way since the late 80s. And then we went on coal in a big way in the mid-2000s. And going into the future, we have in place a plan that basically is driven by coal, yeah, and a bit of renewables. Maybe about 4% going into 2030 of renewables, and maybe hydro to the tune of 5%. So basically, I think we are not alone in Southeast Asia in going for coal in the future. Essentially because I think has been mentioned many times before, the Southeast Asian nations are showing their preference towards coal because coal is the cheapest fuel available at the moment and into the future, and as well as in terms of security, coal is a good bet to ensure security. Of course, next is gas, and we are a major gas producer in the world. In fact, we are the number 2 or number 3 LNG exporter in the world. Nevertheless, we are slowly moving towards market pricing of gas since the early 2000s. So when we move up towards market pricing of gas, this made gas to become more and more expensive. And when there is this opportunity to minimize the cost of generation by using coal, then the industry embark on coal. Having said that, I think as a whole, the country is trying its best to move towards market pricing regime in the power sector. And I think coal has given us a valuable opportunity for us to do that for gas. What we have done is basically because coal is at market price, gas was heavily subsidized. What we are trying to do is slowly to reduce the subsidy gradually and move towards market pricing of gas. And at the end of the day, we will reach a situation anytime now that gas is also being based on market pricing mechanism. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that in this transitional period, I think affordability plays a very big role in us moving towards more renewables other than hydros. And by keeping it as low as possible in terms of the cost of generation, we are able to introduce slowly the renewables, which we have done. I think at the moment we are about 1% or so of renewables. And recently we have embarked on bidding program for large-scale solar. We have also embarked on feed-in tariff mechanism. We have also embarked on net energy metering mechanism for solar. So in Malaysia, solar is going to play a big role in the future towards 2030 at the current situation of very competitive pricing of solar that is happening in the world today. So in a sense, we make it affordable and secure, and then we go for environmental friendliness in the transition period.
Okay, thank you. And again, maybe we'll come back to coal and affordability a little bit later. But Mr. O'Neill.
Thanks, John. REC, Renewable Energy Corporation, is actually one of the longest-running solar PV companies in the world. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year, since our founding in Norway in 1996. And I know a lot of you, 20 years doesn't seem like an old company, but in the solar business, that's a very long time, and REC has long been a pioneer, driving innovation in the industry, providing high-quality solar panels, and driving down cost. We've lived through many of the industry cycles. We've lived through these cost reductions that many of you are hearing about, these 80% price declines since 2008. But what you may not know is that if you're not paying attention, even over the last couple of quarters, those prices have fallen by a further 30%. And this is happening because of the innovation in the industry that's driving down those costs. I heard GTM said a comparison that I found very stunning, and GTM looked at the price of a window in a commercial building. and that averages about $35 to $50 a square foot if you want to have a window installed in a commercial building. And a fully installed solar system is actually $20 to $30 a square foot. It's less expensive than a window. And it's this that's helping to drive the innovation. And at REC, we have manufacturing in Norway and in Singapore. And we control every step of the value chain, from solar silicon to ingots, wafers, cells, and modules. And we really work hard every day to optimize that for the maximum efficiency and the lowest cost through many, many enablers. And I was just thinking that since this session opened this morning, from the opening speech to now, we've manufactured about 5,000 solar modules, and we're shipping those all over the world. Many of those are going today, we're shipping to the United States market, where we've now become the #1 or #2 supplier to the US residential market. But when we're talking about the energy transition, I think in very practical terms about making sure we're making high quality products with long reliability, because it's very important that what we're installing today will last for decades, producing what we expect it to produce, and then continuing to drive down those costs to make it more and more economical in the future. And that's what we're about at REC. We're also worried about our own carbon footprint in the manufacture of our solar panels. Our solar silicon is manufactured using an innovative process that uses 25% of the energy of traditional polysilicon processes. This means, together with using hydroelectric power in Norway, our solar silicon has the lowest carbon footprint in the world. And you don't hear people talking about that a lot, but it's also important in our own industry that we're paying attention to our carbon footprint. So we believe REC has modeled taking the COP21 pledges from around the world and the contribution that solar can make to that. And solar can only make a contribution. We need all sources of low carbon energy, renewable and non-renewable. We need energy efficiency. We know that solar can only make a contribution. But even if we look at that, we're not thinking nearly big enough. If we look at the projection for solar installations, in order to reach that 1.5 degree temperature limit that we're all shooting for, we need, over the next 10 years, an additional 4,800 gigawatts of solar to get us to that target. That's 9 times the current projections for solar. So what we need is very efficient manufacturing, very effective, long-term reliable products to help achieve those goals, and that's the way REC is approaching it. So we're tremendously excited about that.
Fantastic, thank you. That's the solar story. And Mr. Schwartz, Salesforce.com.
Thank you. Let me thank Minister Iswaran and my friends from the Singapore government for having us here today. Very important discussion. I think I've had the privilege of actually speaking at every one of these since the beginning. Salesforce is a Silicon Valley company. I think I may be one of the only ones here from that world, and it's a software company. So we don't make anything that really is a big energy consumer. But it turns out that my founders, not me, I can take no credit for it, invented cloud computing around the year 2000. And one of the things we've learned over the years, as you move from private data centers to the cloud, you save about 90% of the electricity. So moving to the cloud is a huge improvement in efficiency on the one hand. And we also work with many, many energy companies around the world on demand-side management as well. So we're part of the digital revolution that Mr. Gray was speaking about this morning, and is an important force for reducing demand around the world. But I want to touch on 2 key points. I would bet, and we've heard it again and again during the course of today, that there's, I think, a broad consensus about the future of energy. More clean energy, more efficiency, in general, reduce the climate impact around the world, get as many different clean sources as possible, make things as efficient as possible. Unfortunately, I think that consensus is inadequate. Today, virtually, first of all, we're also assuming that oil prices will remain relatively low. I've been around the energy industry for 4 price cycles, and you can be sure that today's low prices will be followed by high prices, and those high prices will in turn be followed by low prices. So counting on the price of energy to drive demand change and supply chain over the long run is a fundamental flaw. We will not have sustained high prices or sustained low prices. We need to find other mechanisms for dealing with that. And on the climate change side of things, we are not nearly aggressive enough. Today, virtually everything that we're talking about is about reducing the growth rate of CO2 from here to here. I represented our company at the Paris negotiations on climate change in December. And one of the clear messages out of that is that there's no conflict between prosperity, growth, and reducing CO2. Many of the world's largest companies, including in incredibly CO2-producing industries like cement, the chairman of Lafarge is part of the B team that our company is part of. He committed toward radical reductions in CO2. So what we're seeing is in the world of business, a willingness to move fairly dramatically toward massive CO2 reductions. But what we really need is something that has now begun in the States, which is called Project Drawdown. If you're really going to go from here, you have to go to here. What will it take to actually reduce the trajectory from a positive trajectory of CO2 to a negative? You need everything we've talked about plus one. You need dramatic improvements in efficiencies. You need substitutes for fossil fuel. But we also need strategies for actually reducing the CO2 in the atmosphere, recarbonizing the earth, if you will, returning CO2 into the soil through forestation efforts, for example. There are a number of biostrategies for taking CO2 out of the atmosphere and putting them back into the earth. So we need that as well. And California, where I come from, is a perfect example of why all of this actually works in a positive sense. California has the highest growth rate in the United States, the lowest unemployment rate in the states, and the lowest carbon footprint in the states. And we have an even more ambitious goal for the future. Our goal by 2050, just adopted by the state legislature, is to reduce by 80% the CO2 from 1990 levels. So that's the kind of reduction that is going to take worldwide if we're actually going to make a difference. And I strongly agree with Madam Riesing that nuclear power has to be an important measure of it. California gets it mostly right except for this. That is that we're walking away from nuclear power, and that's a big mistake. So I think that the urgency of this is much greater than we are already taking seriously. But fortunately, we have a wide range of technologies if we actually pursue them aggressively.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. A call for action and more speed in terms of implementation. And you also mentioned nuclear as well. So I'm going to turn to Ms. Riesing and ask, so given nuclear hasn't really been mentioned much today, why is that? What are the challenges that nuclear needs to overcome to become one of the sort of forefront technologies to speeding up the transition?
First of all, I agree. It has not been mentioned enough, and I think it's not so easy to talk about because you need to be able to answer a lot of questions around nuclear. There's lots of facts you have to have right, so it's easier not to talk about it, and it's easier to talk about things that are like in fashion. But when we see to reality, nuclear is, as I said, progressing, and there is many newcomer countries. I mean, one example is UAE, who is constructing now 4 nuclear reactors, where the first one will come online next year. And that was a very serious choice they made to make a sustainable energy for their children with low carbon. So we see these countries, we see many newcomer countries. So there is a discussion about nuclear. But it seems like in these type of rooms, it's not so fancy to talk about. I don't know why it's like that, but the facts show that nuclear is doing very well.
Right, so the facts say that it is growing and being successful. And Toyota-san, do you want to say something about Japan? Because clearly Japan and nuclear have,
yes,
it's a big debate.
Clearly, nuclear is an important part of our energy mix. By 2030, we have an energy mix goal, and about 20%, 22% of energy mix, particularly power generation, is coming from nuclear. We think energy efficiency is important, but it's simply a promise, and then we think zero carbon energy is important, and renewable energy is there, but renewable energy is not necessarily sufficient because it's intermittent and we need a backup, and then more stable energy such as zero-emission nuclear energy is quite important.
And do you think the public understand that? You're the Japanese public?
Pardon?
Do you think the Japanese public understand that?
Well, I think that's the most important point. I think at this moment still we have not completely succeed in restoring the confidence on safety among the general public. But I think gradually the restart of nuclear reactors has started in Japan, and the most important thing is how to share the information about nuclear safety. I think there is no risk-free energy. Nuclear energy is one of them. The question is not whether we could make nuclear zero-risk energy. I think the important thing is how to reduce the risk of accident to the tolerable level. I think that's the most important point, and I think gradually the people understand that sort of thing, and it takes some time, but gradually the public can understand the importance of nuclear. Without nuclear, we cannot address climate change. We cannot address the problem of energy security.
You want to comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment very shortly on two things here. And I would say safety of nuclear energy is unique because it's so very safe. And you can look at the whole statistics of any energy source. But people believe it is the opposite. And then we have the situation that people believe that nuclear accidents are very unique and uniquely dangerous. But I will say that the Fukushima accident showed that there was no shortening of any single life, and there will be no discernible effects. So in fact, we can show the opposite, that it's in fact safe. And people believe that there is a public acceptance problem. If you look to those countries using nuclear, in all those countries, there is a good support for nuclear. And especially you coming close to the nuclear plants, even more support. And we also see now a lot of environmental groups and environmental profiles, famous environmental profiles, going to support nuclear, because the climate change is a very serious issue, and we have to be serious about that. We have to be serious about using nuclear as well.
Thank you very much. Hopefully, as the debate continues, we'll hear more about nuclear. And just one other thing I wanted to mention in terms of corporates as well. So, Mr. Schwartz and Mr. O'Neill, you both mentioned your own companies and helping companies become sort of renewable, 100% renewable. Do you want to sort of, what are the things that need to happen to make corporates become a real sort of driver in this, in this region and globally?
Well, look, I think actually business has begun to move fairly aggressively. There are relatively few companies in the world left on the other side of this issue that no longer take climate change and environmental issues seriously. The combination of public pressure on the one hand and costs on the other have driven most of us in the right direction. Look, we have been able to offset 100% of our electricity consumption for our data centers by buying wind farms. And that's not unique to us. That's happening all over the world. And what we're seeing is business moving very aggressively for good, solid business reasons. Saving money on the one hand, and actually killing your customers is a very bad idea. And most of us realize, you look at what, for example, coal, just to take that as an example, how many people you mentioned were killed at Fukushima? And the answer is 0. And you look at how many die in coal accidents around the world, coal mining, it's in the thousands. If that were true of nuclear, we would have a very different view of things. So I think part of our responsibility as business is getting the truth out, getting the facts out, communicating effectively about energy efficiency, about energy demand. We've passed, for example, peak oil demand in the United States. Why? Because we've had dramatic improvements in the efficiency of the automobile fleet. Today's car is much more efficient. That was all private investment that did that. So what I see is business has a role in improving technology on the one hand, providing facts on the other, and then supporting the political movements and regulation necessary to get the policies in place that will actually achieve the necessary reductions in CO2.
Do you want to comment about how you've really gone about it? What have been the challenges?
Yeah, we are seeing commercial customers take up solar in a big way, and if you think about it, I mentioned this 30% price reduction in the last 12 months. If the price of cars were down 30%, if the price of your housing was down 30%, you would see a clamoring of interest in those types of products. The same as solar. Businesses get it. They get it that it makes economic sense. And we're seeing the uptake happen very, very quickly now. And it's just a matter of making sure they have the latest knowledge on the latest economics and why it makes sense, and the side benefits it has as well. For example, here in Singapore, REC installed a 2.2 megawatt system for Tiger Brewery on the rooftop of the brewery, which certainly lowers their energy bill, but also lowers the temperature in their brewery. By having those panels on the rooftop and requires less air conditioning. These kinds of benefits we need to quantify and make sure businesses understand. Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Those sound like positive trends. Mr. Hassan, about coal, so one of the challenges in certain parts of the world is coal is very, very cheap. And in places like India, there's a lot of it. So how do you see what can be done about that challenge of affordability that comes with coal?
Yeah, I think coal is not only cheap, but also very stable in terms of its price over the years. I think that's one of the key reasons why I think a lot of countries in Asia are going for coal. If you see the IEA projection that was published in 2015 for Southeast Asia, Energy Outlook, I think it predicts that the 17% of coal share in 2013 will rise to 35% in 2040, for coal.
So given the issues of climate change, though, that shouldn't happen. So what are the things that practically for your country would help you sort of reverse that trend?
Well, I think it's difficult to reverse the coal capacity development, because once you decide and plan up, then it's there for 25 years or so. Right. So in our country, for instance, from 2015 to 2020, we have about 5,000 megawatt of coal being planned up. But we don't only plan up coal, of course, we plan up gas as well. It's about 5,000 megawatt as well. And we have also solar. In fact, we have hydro, about 3,000 megawatt of hydro. So basically, what we can do is basically we can diversify the generation fuel mix. So maybe we have what we call in Malaysia as Herfindahl-Hirschman Index, HHI, as a basis for us to decide diversification of fuel in our generation mix. It shouldn't exceed 0.5. That's why we decided to go on coal, and it will go up to about 56% until 2034 without contravening the HHI criteria. And then, of course, we plan up renewables to further diversify the fuel mix, and it will further improve the HHI. I think there must be a criteria that we can use as a basis to plan our generation fuel mix. And we in Malaysia, we decided that we want to be secure, we want to be cost-effective, affordable, and we want to be clean as well. So we will endeavor to make it cleaner as we go through the years, because we do not cast in stone the plan. Whenever there is opportunity to get in